I grew up in a Portland suburb where lawns were clipped short and fathers measured worth by the sons who would carry on their names. My father, Nathaniel Ward, fit that mold perfectly. He was a bank manager who spoke little but expected obedience. My mother, Marjorie, stayed home and smoothed over his sharpness with quiet smiles. She rarely argued, never challenged, and lived as though her only purpose was to keep the household running. My two older brothers seemed to shine under his gaze. Thomas, already a teenager when I was small, earned applause for his grades and leadership roles. Andrew, closer to me in age, received trophies and endless encouragement for his games on the soccer field. Their victories were celebrated at the dinner table with laughter and praise. My victories report cards with straight A's. Science fair ribbons were acknowledged with a nod before the conversation turned back to the boys. I tried to match them. I studied harder, ran faster, even begged for toy trucks instead of dolls, thinking maybe my father would notice. But approval never came. My mother's answer was to teach me to cook, to fold laundry just so, to keep a house in order. These are skills that will make you valuable one day, she told me. Valuable to someone else. She meant, when my mother became pregnant again, my father declared with certainty that the baby would be a boy. He painted the nursery blue before she was even showing, and when Daniel was born, he treated it as proof of destiny. He posed for photographs, passed out cigars, and called him the family's future. I was 10 years old enough to understand that I had become unnecessary. The morning they told me, the sky over Portland was gray and damp, the kind of weather that usually meant hot chocolate and blankets. Instead, my father cleared his throat over breakfast and announced that I would soon be living with a better family. He spoke as if he were finalizing a transfer at the bank, not discarding his daughter. My mother sat beside him, eyes lowered to her plate, fingers twisting the hem of her apron. At first, I thought it was a punishment, that maybe if I apologized for not being enough too loud, too quiet, too much of a girl, they would change their minds. But their calmness left no room for negotiation. My father gave me until the afternoon to pack. 1 suitcase, he said. Only what's essential. I walked to my room in a daze, staring at the pale pink walls that had never felt truly mine. I opened the closet and stared at rows of dresses, school sweaters, hand-me-downs from cousins. What was essential, I folded 2 changes of clothes, slid in the paperback books I had read until their spines cracked, and tucked my worn stuffed rabbit into the corner. On top, I placed a framed photo from Christmas, the last one before Daniel was born. In it, we looked almost like a family, and I wanted proof that once I belonged. That afternoon, they drove me downtown and parked outside a squat brick building with a faded sign, Family Services. The woman who met us at the door had a clipboard and a tired smile. My father filled out forms briskly, handed over the suitcase, and shook her hand like he was closing a deal. My mother hugged me once, lightly, whispering that I'd understand when I was older. Then they walked away without looking back. That night in the group home, I lay on a narrow cot that smelled of bleach, clutching the photo against my chest. I made a promise to myself in the silence I would never again beg anyone to love me, and I would never forget the day I learned what I was worth. The group home was only the beginning. Within weeks, I was placed in my first foster family, a crowded house on the east side of Portland where 6 other children already shared too little space. The older ones bullied the younger ones, and the foster parents operated more like wardens than caregivers. Meals were quick and loud, beds crammed into rooms with peeling wallpaper. I learned to keep my head down, to stay quiet, and to vanish into the background where no one could single me out for trouble. When that placement collapsed under its own weight, I was sent to a childless couple in their 40s who spoke gently at first, calling me sweetheart and buying me new shoes. For a few weeks, I thought maybe this was what a family was supposed to feel like: warm dinners, questions about school, a softness in the air. But by the 2nd month, their patience thinned. They wanted a younger child, someone pliable enough to mold into the baby they had never had. At 10, I was already too independent, too scarred, and one morning I was packed up again like an unwanted parcel and sent back to the agency. The next stop was a tidy suburban home with manicured lawns and locked cabinets. The parents were punctual with rules and allowances, but their eyes lingered on the stipend checks more than on the children they took in. I was a line item in their monthly budget, another mouth that earned them money. Their smiles never reached their eyes. And I stopped expecting them to. In those years, my strategy became survival through erasure. I folded into corners, filled notebooks with careful schoolwork, and avoided asking for anything beyond what was required. Teachers praised me for being studious, but none of them saw that my silence was not discipline. It was defense. The only one who seemed to notice was my social worker, Elena Torres. She arrived each month with a clipboard and sharp eyes that missed little. "You're bright, Celine," she told me once, leaning across the table in the agency office. "But you're hiding behind those grades." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. And yet, part of me wondered what she saw that others did not, a question that lingered as she began to mention a man named James Calder. Elena told me about him one gray afternoon at the agency office. "His name is Jameson Calder," she said, tapping her pen against the folder she carried. "He lives just outside Portland, in a house with too much space for one man. He's 62, a widower, no children of his own. He wants to foster again." I nodded, unmoved. I'd heard promises like that before. A week later, I sat stiffly in Elena's car as we turned down a tree-lined drive that ended in front of a craftsman-style home with wide eaves and a deep porch. James Calder was already waiting, leaning against the railing with a patience that seemed practiced. He was tall and lean, his silver hair swept neatly back, his eyes a pale blue that met mine without forcing a smile. "Instead," he said, "you must be Celine. I've been hoping to meet you." He didn't ask me to perform. He didn't run through house rules. Instead, he walked me through the rooms, wooden floors polished with care, shelves lined with books, the smell of something faintly herbal simmering in the kitchen. When he opened the door to the room that could be mine, he simply said, "I haven't painted. I thought you might want to choose the colors yourself." No one had ever asked me that before. In the weeks that followed, I tested him with silence. He answered with presence. When nightmares jolted me awake, I found him waiting outside my door with hot chocolate. When I struggled with homework, he sat beside me until the problems made sense. On one Saturday, I found him in the garage, measuring planks of wood. "A bookshelf," he explained. "I figured your books deserved a proper home." It was the small things that began to unravel my defenses, the way he placed my school drawings on the refrigerator, the way he never hurried my words when I finally dared to speak them. At 11, I learned what steadiness looked like. The day the court finalized the adoption, Elena smiled as the judge declared my new name Celine Calder. I held the papers in my hands, but it was James's quiet nod that anchored me. For the first time, permanence felt possible, and the weight of belonging settled over me like a blanket I hadn't known I needed. James had a way of opening the world to me without making it feel like a lesson. One Saturday, he drove us into the West Hills, and we walked through the grand halls of Pittock Mansion. He pointed out the lines of the staircases, the balance of the windows, the way light seemed to follow us from room to room. Another weekend, he led me downtown to Keller Fountain Park, where water cascaded over concrete steps like something both natural and constructed. Architecture, he told me, isn't just about walls. It's about shaping how people feel inside a space. Those trips planted something in me. I began sketching in notebooks, not just houses, but entire neighborhoods, inventing ways to make them warmer, safer, more alive. James bought me pencils and graph paper, never questioning whether I was serious. He simply encouraged me, as though he already knew where it would lead. High school tested me in different ways. I still carried the instinct to disappear. But slowly I learned how to stand my ground. Zoe Ramirez barged into my life in 10th grade, sliding into the seat next to me in the library and announcing we'd be partners for a history project. She was confident, outspoken, impossible to ignore. Somehow, she decided I was worth knowing, and against my own caution, I let her stay. For the first time, I had someone my age who asked about me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Therapy helped too. Dr. Alice Monroe's office was filled with books and soft chairs, a place where silence wasn't punished. She guided me back through the years I tried to bury, reminding me that my parents' rejection said more about their limits than mine. Slowly, I started believing her. By senior year, the impossible happened: a letter from Cornell University's architecture program. Acceptance, printed in bold letters. James framed it and hung it in the living room, telling anyone who visited that his daughter was headed to New York. For the first time, the word future didn't frighten me. It felt like something I had already begun to build. By my early 30s, I had found my rhythm. My designs were no longer just sketches in notebooks, but structures standing tall across Portland community centers with walls of glass and courtyards where neighbors gathered. Awards came, articles in local papers, and invitations to speak at conferences. Yet every achievement felt incomplete unless I could share it with James. He remained my anchor, sitting in the front row at openings, his pride steady and quiet. It was during one of those celebrations that I noticed the change. He clapped, but his hands trembled slightly. Later, at dinner, he pushed food around his plate, his appetite gone. When I asked, he brushed it off with a joke about age catching up to him. Weeks later, the truth arrived like a thunderclap: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis shattered me, but James seemed almost calm. "We can't choose the length of the road," he said softly, "only how we walk it." He refused aggressive treatments that would steal what little time he had left. Instead, he chose home, and I chose to be his caretaker. Our house became a place of measured days. Mornings were filled with medication schedules and tea in the sunroom. Afternoons, we revisited photo albums, his stories weaving the past into something I could carry forward. In the evenings, when pain pressed hardest, I sat beside him and read aloud, my voice filling the silence that once frightened me as a child, but now felt like protection. Even as his body weakened, his mind remained sharp. He asked about my projects, urged me to keep building, reminded me that my work mattered. On one quiet night, when the rain tapped against the windows, he took my hand. His voice was barely a whisper, but the words carved themselves into me, build something that outlives us both. I stayed with him until the very end, holding his hand as his breathing slowed, telling him he had given me more than any blueprint ever could. When the silence finally came, it felt like the world had shifted, yet beneath the grief was a steady pulse of resolve, the beginning of a promise I would have to keep. The weeks after James's passing blurred together in a haze of condolences and paperwork. I moved through it all as if underwater, every step slowed by grief. When the lawyer called me to his office, I expected little more than formalities: his house, his savings, perhaps a few personal belongings. What I did not expect was the number written in black ink across the will. James had left everything to me. His modest home, his investments, the remnants of the business he had sold years before. Altogether, it amounted to over $27 million. For a long moment, I just stared at the figure, unable to reconcile it with the man who preferred flannel shirts and old gardening gloves. He had never lived lavishly. His joys had been found in books, quiet dinners, and my company. To learn he had carried this kind of wealth all along made me realize how little I had ever understood the scale of his sacrifices. He had saved, invested, and protected, and now he was entrusting it all to me. News traveled fast. Within days, local papers ran the story, "Architect inherits Calder fortune." My face, pulled from some company website, appeared beside headlines I never asked for. Colleagues offered congratulations that sounded awkward, strangers treated me like a curiosity, and acquaintances hinted at new opportunities that suddenly felt tainted. At night, I lay awake in the quiet house, the walls heavier without James's presence. Wealth didn't soften the loss, it sharpened it. The money felt less like a gift and more like a responsibility, a weight pressing me to prove I was worthy of what he had built. I walked through his study one evening, running my fingers along the spines of books we had once read together. The fortune was his last lesson. I realized he hadn't left me money to spend. He had left me the means to keep building, to honor the promise I had made at his bedside. It was then that the doorbell rang, its sound cutting sharply through the house, pulling me into a chapter I hadn't anticipated. 3 months after the headlines, I was beginning to find a rhythm again. I split my time between work and sorting through James's belongings, boxing what could be donated, keeping the pieces that still smelled faintly of him. The house was quieter than ever, but I was learning to breathe inside its silence. One rainy afternoon, the doorbell rang. Through the glass, I saw a man in his 60s, well-dressed but worn at the edges. When I opened the door, a crack. He spoke a name I hadn't heard in decades. "It's me, your father, Nathaniel Ward." The air left my lungs. He looked smaller than the giant I remembered, his frame slouched, his face lined deeply. Yet the arrogance lingered in the way he tried to step past me into the house. Behind him stood a younger man in a suit, briefcase in hand. Nathaniel offered a rehearsed smile. "I've been looking for you for years," he claimed. "When I read about your inheritance, I knew it was finally time to make things right. I didn't invite them in. I let him talk on the porch, his words tumbling out about regrets, mistakes, and how family should forgive. The lawyer cleared his throat and spoke of reconciliation and shared legacy. My hands tightened around the doorframe as I listened. It was not remorse. It was strategy. That night, I called a private investigator. If Nathaniel had reappeared after decades of silence, I wanted the truth. A week later, the report landed on my desk, gambling debts piled high. Foreclosure on his last house, jobs abandoned, bridges burned. My brothers, the sons he had once prized, were both estranged. One had cut ties years ago after endless financial demands. The other hadn't spoken to him since college. The image was complete. This was not a man returning to mend bonds. This was a man circling the scent of money. And for the first time since childhood, I felt no need to beg for his approval. When his lawyer called again to request a meeting, I agreed, not to reconcile but to confront. We met in a polished conference room at my lawyer's downtown office. Nathaniel arrived late, swaggering as if the delay were meant to prove his importance. His lawyer set down a worn briefcase, and Nathaniel leaned back in his chair with the air of a man convinced he held the upper hand. "You've done well for yourself," he began, his voice carrying the same sharpness I remembered from childhood. "But blood counts for something. That fortune is part of my legacy, whether you admit it or not." I let him speak, watching as he dressed his demands in words like family and heritage. Then I slid the investigator's report across the table. Pages of debts, foreclosures, and failed schemes lay exposed between us. "You forfeited any claim to me the day you signed those papers," I said evenly. "You never looked for me until money was involved. I owe you nothing." His smile faltered, and for the first time I saw a flicker of the desperation behind the performance. "So, that's it? You're going to turn your back on your own father. I'll offer one thing," I replied. "Rehab funding, nothing more. If you want a future, it won't be through me, it will be through getting help." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, sensing the meeting had collapsed. Nathaniel's face hardened, but he said nothing more. As I stood to leave, I felt the strange lightness that comes from closing a door that should never have been open. Days later, I received an email from Jason, my middle brother. He had read about the inheritance and recognized my name. His words were hesitant but sincere in apology for being silent when we were children, for not protecting me when he should have. We agreed to meet for coffee, cautious but willing, the first tentative step toward a bond left unfinished. It was a reminder that some doors, carefully opened, might still lead somewhere worth walking. The idea came slowly at first, like a seed pressing through soil. With James gone and the inheritance heavier than I could carry alone, I knew the money had to mean more than stability for me. It had to be transformed into something that would honor the man who had chosen me when no one else would. That's how the Calder Foundation for Family Futures was born. We built the first project in Portland, 20 units of affordable housing for young adults aging out of foster care, with a community center downstairs and counseling services on site. I walked through the halls before the opening, running my hands along the freshly painted walls, remembering the nights I spent in group homes, desperate for permanence. Now, here was a place designed to give others the belonging I had once been denied. The day of the ribbon cutting, I stood at the podium with the press gathered, my name still new to them but the mission already alive in me. I spoke of James, of the life he had built for me, and of the promise I had made to carry it forward. Family is not blood, I told the crowd, my voice steady. It is choice, commitment, and love. And when we choose each other, we build something stronger than inheritance. We build a future. As the ribbon fell and applause rose around me, I reached for the silver key pendant James had given me years before. It warmed in my hand, no longer just a symbol of a home he opened for me, but of the lives now being opened for others. When fortune and freedom finally land in your hands, which future will you choose to build and for whom?